Theresa May.
Yes. She's going to use a speech today to acknowledge that incidents of anti-Semitism in the UK are on the rise. The Prime Minister will vow to call out hatred towards Jewish people by introducing an official definition of anti-Semitism. So let's go live to Westminster, and Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen is there for us. So Tamara, just exactly how does the Prime Minister think that this definition will help to cut down on anti-Semitism?
Well, Theresa May has had a long-standing commitment to tackling anti-Semitism when she was Home Secretary, and she's making clear that this will continue in government. And she says the next step is to adopt an international definition drawn up by a charity, because she says too often the people are wriggling out, essentially, of accusations of anti-Semitism because it is ill-defined. And she says it's time to draw a line about what is acceptable. Now, this is the definition that the government will be adopting, which can also now be used by police forces, by councils and by other public bodies to call it out. This is the definition here. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and to religious facilities. Now, interestingly, this charity, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, has also given a number of examples of what sort of behaviour should be called out alongside this, which are actions which seek to stereotype Jewish people, to justify attacking or killing them, claiming that the State of Israel is a racist endeavour, or comparing it to Nazi Germany. Now, the authors make clear that this isn't about shutting down legitimate criticism of the Israeli government, which can be criticised like any other government, but it's about using that as cover for anti-Semitism. And that was a point also echoed by the former Cabinet Minister, Eric Pickles, who spoke to Sky News earlier today.
It's about recognising that words like Zionism and some attacks on Israeli people are just a thin disguise for anti-Semitism. It's perfectly legitimate to attack the Israeli government, but to hold Jews in the United Kingdom or in France or the rest of Europe responsible is sensibly now described as anti-Semitic.
Now, Theresa May will be speaking this afternoon at a reception for the Conservative Friends of Israel, and she will say that she is proud to lead the party that takes the firmest stance on this issue, a reference to the problems of the Labour Party on this issue, with Jeremy Corbyn being accused of failing to tackle anti-Semitism, particularly in its subtler forms.
OK, Tamara, thanks very much.
On hearing Allenby's speech, the Muslim leaders gathered their delegation and walked off. In the end, there was no disguising the victors' religious credentials. By entering Jerusalem, Allenby was making real what so many at home already believed. The Holy Land was part of England.
There's been a whole tradition of taking this imagery and just imagining England itself as a sort of a holy land, a promised land. And of course, with Sunday school culture, with the endless hymns and sermons that taught children about the geography of Palestine, nothing was more natural than to take these images and think about them as their own childhood. So of course, the idea that now England could own the promised land was a very intriguing one.
But if the Holy Land was so English, why, quite apart from their political aims, should devout believers like Balfour and Lloyd George hand this holiest of Christian sites to the Jews? Quite simply, they believed the Bible decreed it. With Jerusalem already secured, Allenby fought the final victorious battle of his Palestine campaign here on the plain of Esdraelon. As a student of military history and a devout Christian, he would have known that the Bible prophesies this place as the future setting for the greatest battle of them all. Armageddon.
Where does that word Armageddon come from?
Today, many visitors to the religious sites of the Holy Land are Christian Zionists, Christians who believe in the biblical prophecy of Christ's reappearance as the Battle of Armageddon is being fought.
The Bible says that the Lord will supernaturally return from heaven and that he will fight for Israel.
But Christ's reappearance depends on the fulfillment of one essential condition. First, the Jews have to return to their homeland. In early 20th century Britain, Balfour and Lloyd George were part of this same religious tradition. They too had been steeped in Zionism and believed in the biblical prophecy of the Jews' homecoming. Lloyd George spoke candidly about the Balfour Declaration's origins.
As you might remember, we've been trained even more in Hebrew history than the history of our own country. On Sunday in our Sunday schools, we were thoroughly versed in the history of the Hebrews. We had all that in our minds, so that the appeal came to sympathetic and educated and, on that question, intelligent hearts.
Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
For Lloyd George, Balfour and others, Sunday school faith and an understanding of biblical prophecy mixed seamlessly with political necessity.
For Lloyd George, the sense of closure, the sense of poetic justice in a way, the idea that the Jews could once again be restored here, this was crucial to the declaration. Of course, there were all these strategic, political, even commercial interests, but the religious question was always there in the background.
People like Balfour and others in the government at that time believed, wholeheartedly that this country belongs to the Jews. They thought that the Zionists could help them more in some places than the Arabs.
military conquerors to colonial masters, the British would now govern Palestine as keepers of this version of religious history and encourage the Jews to return home. If this meant ignoring the nationalist ambitions of Palestinian Arabs, so be it. In stark contrast to the earlier guarantees of Arab independence brokered by Lawrence, Balfour made the British agenda crystal clear.
In Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes, of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land.
Here you have these people who are professors in Cambridge and in Oxford and at the Sorbonne, and they didn't know any Arabs. They haven't, you know, as far as they were concerned, they were more or less savages who were living in the desert.
A Jewish state would exist in name only unless there were more Jews and more land for them. The British recognized this and encouraged the Zionist movement to speed up immigration and the new settlers to buy land from the Arabs. During the second decade of British rule, more than 250,000 Jews settled in Palestine. The British pretended, and some believed, that the establishment of a national home for the Jews could happen without hurting the Arabs. But of course, how could it?
There were many options for the British. They didn't choose the right ones. And maybe it's easier for me to say it in hindsight, but there were options they didn't choose. And these options would have undoubtedly benefited the indigenous population of Palestine and would have disadvantaged the Jewish community. But they haven't taken these decisions. They took decisions that basically benefited the Zionist project and proved to be catastrophical.
The British did good things in Palestine. They built roads and schools and developed a modern economy. But once they had declared their support for a Jewish state and at the same time promised to protect Arab rights, they were passengers in a car crash.
I think they trapped themselves into this conflict. They put themselves in the middle when they promised one side something and they promised the other side something which is contradicting. And then whenever they tried to balance one step that they made, then the other side will be angry and vice versa.
With Arabs outnumbering Jews by 10 to 1 in Palestine, the implementation of the Balfour Declaration would inevitably mean the displacement of many thousands of Arab families. This would create a lasting desire for revenge. These men are members of the Palestinian militia, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. Their leader, Zakaria Zubeidi, heads Israel's most wanted list.
وعد بالفور هو وعد الدمار للشعب الفلسطيني. وعد بالفور وعد الإسرائيليين بإقامة الدولة الفلسطينية بإقامة الدولة الإسرائيلية على أرض لم يمتلك ما كانتش ملك للبريطان ولا ملك للأوروبيين. وعد بالفور سطو على شعب فلسطيني على أراضي فلسطينية وطرد فلسطينيين من أرضهم واستيطان إسرائيليين مكانهم. كل قضية الشعب الفلسطيني بده يتحمل مسؤوليتها البريطان.
Why are the Palestinians dehumanized? Why have they become the naughty boy of the world? Why are the Palestinians in camps? In Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, in Iraq, in Egypt. Okay, why are they in camps? Because of the Balfour Declaration.
When the first communist revolution in Russia failed and the Jews had to scramble out of Russia, they all went to Germany. And Germany gave them refuge, and they were treated very nicely. And here, they sold Germany down the river for no reason at all, other than they wanted Palestine as a so-called Jewish commonwealth. All the great leaders, the big names that you read about in connection with Zionism today, they wrote in all their papers, and the press was filled with their statements, that the feeling against the Jews in Germany is due to the fact that they realized that this great defeat was brought about by our intercession and bringing the United States into the war against them. Not a hair on the head of any Jew was harmed. Not a single hair. Hugo Schoenfeld, a Jew who Cordell Hull sent to Europe in 1933 to investigate the so-called camps of political prisoners. And he wrote back that he found them in very fine condition. They were in excellent shape. Everybody treated well. And they were filled with communists. Well, a lot of them were Jews, because the Jews happened to be maybe 98% of the communists in Europe at that time. And there were some priests there, and Masons and others who had international affiliation. The Jews tried to keep the lid on this fact. They didn't want the world to really understand that they had sold out Germany and that the Germans resented that. So they did take appropriate action against them. They discriminated against them wherever they could. They shunned them. The Jews of the world didn't know what to do. So they called a meeting in Amsterdam. Jews from every country in the world attended in July 1933. And they said to Germany, you fire Hitler and you put every Jew back into his former position, whether he was a communist, no matter what he was. You can't treat us that way. And we, the Jews of the world, are calling upon you and serving this ultimatum upon you. In 1933, when Germany refused to surrender to the World Conference of Jews in Amsterdam, they broke up, and Mr. Untermeyer came back to the United States, who was the head of the American delegation and the president of the whole conference, and he went from the steamer to ABC and made a radio broadcast throughout the United States in which he said, the Jews of the world now declare a holy war against Germany. We are now engaged in a sacred conflict against the Germans, and we are going to starve them into surrender. We are going to use a worldwide boycott against them that will destroy them because they are dependent upon their export business. Naturally, the Germans said, why, who are these people to declare a boycott against us and throw all our people out of work and our industries come to a standstill, who are they to do that to us? And they naturally resented it. Certainly they painted swastikas on stores owned by Jews. Why should a German go in and give their money to a storekeeper who is part of a boycott, who is going to starve Germany into surrender to the Jews of the world? After this thing got out of hand, it was absolutely necessary for the Jews and Germany to lock horns in a war to see which one was going to survive. In the meanwhile, I had lived in Germany, and I knew that the Germans had decided Europe is going to be Christian or communist. There is no in-between. It's going to be Christian or it's going to be communist. And the Germans decided, we're going to keep it Christian if possible. And they started to rearm. And their intention was, by that time, the United States had recognized the Soviet Union, which they did in November 1933. The Soviet Union was becoming very powerful, and Germany realized, well, our turn is going to come soon unless we are strong.
Not my own theory, it's a theory which is in the files of the War Refugee Board. And the other theory is the interesting one, for which again I thank one of Mr. Zundel's henchmen, who's been doing extensive work, Paul Norris here, who's been doing extensive work in the British archives. By doing the work in the British archives that the other historians have not done, Paul Norris has turned up the evidence that our own psychological warfare executive were behind the entire gas chamber story. Back in the early 1940s, 1942, 43, 1944, our psychological warfare executive, the PWE, which was a branch of the British intelligence service, decided in a prolongation of the entirely admirable and justifiable propaganda warfare that we had conducted so well in World War I. You remember the stories about the Belgian children with their hands hacked off by the wicked Germans, which everyone believed for years after World War I. We carried on with the same methods in World War II, with big lies and little lies. And the biggest lie that we propagated, as far as I can see, was the gas chamber lie. And once again, we're quoting from the archives. They're in the British archives, how the psychological warfare executive decides quite cold-bloodedly and cynically to start putting out over the radio waves the allegation that the Germans have built special gas chambers for gassing the Jews and getting rid of them. And later on in the files, around about 1944, you find the chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee, who is responsible for the psychological warfare executive, writing a handwritten minute. His name is Victor Cavendish Bentinck, an eminent banker, an industrialist, still alive in England now, Lord Portland as he is now, chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee, writing and handwriting in 1944, words to the following effect. We've had a good run for our money with this gas chamber lie, but really we've got to be a bit careful because eventually it's going to be exposed and then our entire psychological warfare effort will be brought down with it. So isn't it a good time now to distance ourselves from this particular story? We've set the hair running, now we ought to let it go off by itself.
I appreciate your liberality. I'm not surprised now because I've gotten to know you a little better, and you are a liberal of the 19th century type, the way I feel I am, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We are far more tolerant actually than our enemies. You know?
Yeah, classical liberalism.
And that each man and each woman have a right to say their piece and state their mind and all this kind of stuff. And our enemies, who always call us bigots and closed minds and hate mongers and all this stuff, they could actually take a slice of us, you know?
Certainly. Even when I was not yet a revisionist, even when I still bought the entire Orthodox line, I was always infuriated by attempts to censor or to freeze somebody out of public discourse in some way or another. I felt everybody had a right to say what they wanted to say and to be respected for that.
And did your parents do that, teach you that?
My mother specifically.
Yeah.
I was brought up much along the same lines of thought as I now speak to other people, of freedom being an end in and of itself, freedom being a benefit to society, and that people who try and obstruct someone else's freedom need to be fought, even if the person whose freedom is being obstructed is not connected with you in any way. Even if it's somebody else, you get just as much benefit out of fighting for someone else's freedom as for your own. So I try to live that in my daily life. Yeah. My biological father was a German Jew, and my father presently is an English Jew. Although from Russia, I think his parents migrated to London from Russia.
Right. That must be where the eye color is coming from. Your biological father, then, right?
Yeah, definitely. I know that his family came from both Germany and Holland.
Yeah.
And they came to the United States before that wave of Russian Jewish immigrants. They were the financially better off German and other European Jews that came over before the wave of immigrants and established themselves in the South.
You mean like late last century? Or?
Yeah, right around the middle of last century.
Yeah.
Jews had been part of the United States, but had never in the beginning really separated themselves. They had tried to blend in to basic American culture, and especially the European Jews, who were not physically different, as opposed to the Russian Jews that came over with their customs and their traditions, and a lot of times with the Jewish beards and the Pesach and everything else.
Yeah, it's very interesting. That maybe would explain. People ask me, what would motivate this young Jewish man to actually step so much out of line with Jewish political orthodoxy or social orthodoxy, and so you then really go back to what you could call, what in political terms, old Republican money. You go back to the older pre-communist revolutionary types who came out of Russia and so on.
I will say as well that there was always somewhat of an independent streak among certain Jews, but I would say that Zionism had a negative effect on that. If you study Judaism before the dawn of the age of Zionism in Israel, there was more dissent among Jews, and there was, and if you go back to before the 40s, there was a great debate among the Jewish community as pro and anti-Zionists really going at it. Many Jews who did not favor the taking of Palestine and the creation of Israel, and that debate was more or less stifled with the victory of the Zionists and somewhat of an all-encompassing takeover of all sides of Judaism by the Zionists.
Actually, I studied for my trial some of the microfilms for the New York Times, and I was amazed how Menahem Begin, the nasty press that he had up until the 50s in the United States. So that debate really raged well into the 50s.
And of course this kind of brings the Holocaust into it, because a lot of Jews, much like my mother, more liberal Jews in America, who did not radically favor Israel, they didn't like the concept of taking the land from the Arabs, or in general they didn't favor the concept of Jews being told to move to a desert where there was a war going on, as opposed to the relative comfort that they were in. But it was the Holocaust, and it was the bludgeoning with the Holocaust and saying we have to have this or else the Holocaust will happen again. We have to get out of Europe because Europe only wants to kill us. And it was the Holocaust that made most of the anti-Zionist Jews rethink their position and kind of give way towards the Zionists.
You know, this is one of the big things that you have taught me in those times that I've been together with you. The immense role that this Holocaust story plays for Jewish self-definition. It wasn't clear to me before. But you say it's even more important now than Torah or even Talmud teaching. That's really something.
Myself, I can take as a prime example. Because I was a secular Jew and therefore not religious, I was not bar mitzvahed. The only time I really went to temple was when my friends were bar mitzvahed. But because of the secularization, and yet at the same time having the identity of being a Jew, something like the Holocaust became far more important, because that was a defining factor of my Judaism. The history of persecution, hatred of Nazis, hatred of Germans, hatred of anti-Semites, whoever they are defined as then and now. That is what makes you a Jew. I've often said that because so many Jews nowadays are not physically that different from other white people, as opposed to, let's say, Asians or blacks, who by their physical features are defined as separate, but many Jews, because of a lot of interbreeding in Europe with Europeans, are not that physically different. Jews need Jew haters to define them, so they create anti-Semites. They love having lists of anti-Semites, because it is these anti-Semites that allow them to have the definition of being separate. And a Jew without a Jew hater is nothing. Jews need their anti-Semitism, which is why Jews invest so much in fighting anti-Semitism and calling attention to anti-Semitism, and literally anything, any criticism of Israel or Israeli policies or criticism of what Jews might be doing will be labeled as anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, because Jews flourish from pointing to what they call Jew haters and anti-Semitism. It's more than just a fundraising tool for them. It's part of their identity to have enemies. Their enemies list defines them.
Is that a recent phenomenon?
I would say certainly the latter part of this century. As Zionism has grown, because what you see now coming out of the Zionist era, once Israel was established, you see somewhat of a special circumstance in the world for Jews, because now Jews can be a race, or they can be a religion, or they can be a nationality. If a Jew wants to, he can express his Judaism by a devotion to Israel, like secular nationalism, or he can show his Judaism by claiming to be racially a Jew. His parents were Jewish and he is. He can be an atheist but still be a Jew, or he can claim his Judaism by believing in the Old Testament or the Torah or studying the Talmud. So it's all at their disposal, these three things, and there are not too many other groups of people on earth that can claim those three things like that.
Now, can Jews easily move between those three, like select from it, like a menu?
Exactly.
One day this, the next day that, whenever it suits them? Or?
Exactly, and it enables the Jewish advocacy groups to select various pockets of Jews for support at any one time. When support is needed, they can target the nationalist, the Zionist community, or they can target the religious Jewish community, or they can simply target all Jews, saying, well, your parents were a Jew, you're a Jew, you're the one that's going to be killed when the Nazis come back. by virtue of your race. And they can target any of those three groups, or all three at the same time. It makes it very easy, because the heart of political consulting, the heart of working in a political group is identifying a market of people and playing to that market. It's the exact same as advertising. When you go to these modern advertising facilities, they are doing demographic work, identifying markets. What do the 18 to 30-year-olds buy? What do the 50 to 60-year-old women buy?
No, what you were saying then is that the difficulty that I faced of not being able to reach out, even though I've made for years these gestures of extending the hand of cooperation, if not friendship or whatever, at least a kind of a side-by-side, leaving both communities live side-by-side with our own concepts of history. I've gotten nowhere. And so is that possibly because they need me as a tool for self-definition? That would be a tragedy, you know?
That is a very good take on the situation. I think they need Ernst Zundel to kick around, because putting your face like on the cover of the B'nai B'rith magazine, and you certainly get a lot of press, albeit negative press, but certainly press up here in Canada.
In a few days, on the 27th of January 2015, the world will be inundated by a media onslaught commemorating the capture by the Soviet Red Army of the German concentration camp at Auschwitz at the end of the Second World War. Auschwitz is the iconic landmark of the so-called Holocaust, that is, the alleged murder of 6 million Jews on an industrial scale in homicidal gas chambers. What the world's mass media will not acknowledge is that the allegation of mass murder committed at Auschwitz has absolutely nothing to substantiate it. The allegation was made by a commission of the Soviet government, the same Soviet government commission which falsely and wickedly blamed the Germans for the cold-blooded mass murder of the Polish officers at Katyn, a crime which is now acknowledged and known by everybody to have been committed by the Soviets themselves. So now, some 70 years after these wartime events, we call upon Russian President Vladimir Putin to initiate an impartial, scientific, forensic investigation of the original Soviet allegation of mass murder committed at Auschwitz. I am Richard Edmonds, and I support the rights of victors and vanquished to have a voice some 70 years after the end of the Second World War. And I am joined by the Grand Dame of Historical Revisionism, Ursula Haberbeck.
I want to tell the British people that in Germany, nobody at the time knows where the 6 million Jews were killed by the Germans. They all know that this still is the most terrible crime that ever happened in history, done by the Germans. But if you have such a big crime and can't tell us where it happened, it doesn't have any place, then this can't be a real fact. Because every crime where you kill just one, but even 6 millions, must have a place where it happened. But I myself have asked all the institutes that could know it, even the Center of the Jews in Germany, and all the judges and so on, but nobody could tell me and answer me within 5 years. And after 5 years, questioning all over the Bundesrepublik, I told the Minister for Justice if he now could arrange an open discussion where it happened. I got no answer even from him. From all the others, I even got any answer, never. Not one group or institute or minister or lawyer did answer my question.
People in England, America, Australia have no idea what a tyranny this country is.
Hundreds, we have more than 2,000 process in 1 year since 10 years.
The word is trial in English.
Trials, yes. More than 2,000 trials a year, and that over more than 10 years. So you can imagine how many people have suffered from it. And families have been destroyed, and they lost their job, and so on and so on. That they said the truth.
And simply for inquiring
Yes.
into the
Yes.
sources for it. They are not promoting any ideas, they are simply asking the questions like you do.
Yes, and now what happened in Paris is just for us, because all the heads of the nation said press freedom and meaning freedom is the greatest thing for democracy. And therefore I say I use this freedom.
This is the world that you know.
Since you're attacking us, can you give us a question? Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
Mr. President-elect, since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization
You are
is
attacking
terrible.
our news organization.
Your organization
Can you give
is
us a
terrible.
chance
Let's
to
go.
ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can
Quiet.
you state,
Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state
She's asking
categorically,
a question.
Mr.
Don't be rude.
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you
No,
give
I'm
us
not
a
going to give you a
question?
question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody... No, Mr. President-elect, that's not
Go ahead.
appropriate.
The hostile takeover of Donald Trump on Vince McMahon has happened at WrestleMania 23. I didn't think he would do it. I just would think that.
Fool me once, fool me once, fool me once. Shame on, shame on. Shame on you, shame on you, shame on you. Fool me, take that fool again, take that fool again, take that fool again, take that fool again, take that fool again.
You know, what she did with the emails was fine. You think it was fine to delete 33,000 emails? I don't think so. She said the 33,000 emails had to do with her daughter's wedding, number one, and a yoga class. Well, maybe we'll give 3 or 4 or 5 or something. 33,000 emails deleted. And now she's saying there wasn't anything wrong.
It's just not true, and so please
You
go
didn't delete them?
Allow her to respond, please. Personal emails, not official.
33,000? Hillary Clinton, I think, is a terrific woman. I mean, I'm a little biased because I've known her for years. I live in New York, she lives in New York, and I've known her and her husband for years, and I really like them both a lot. And as you know, most people know, she's a world-class liar. Hillary's a great friend of mine. Her husband is a great friend of mine. They're fantastic people. I mean, you know the thing, they get a bad knock. She's a very nice woman. People think tough, and I guess she's tough, but she's a very nice woman, and he's a very nice guy. We know all about the smarts and how smart they are, but they are good people. There's never been anybody in the history of politics in this nation that's been so abusive to women. Hillary Clinton attacked those same women and attacked them viciously, 4 of them here tonight. Hillary's a great friend of mine. Her husband is a great friend of mine. They're fantastic people. I mean, but she's a very nice woman, and he's a very nice guy. These are all lies. We say lie, 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 lie. Lie. Dirty, rotten liar.
No, but why did she get rid of it? Hillary, rotten Clinton. Rotten Clinton. Hillary, rotten Clinton, right?
And they are, just really terrific people. I like them both very much, but I think you'll be looking at the record of Hillary Clinton and how did she do as Secretary of State, probably above and beyond everybody else and everything else. It's a disgrace, and honestly, you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Secretary Clinton, I want to follow up on that. I'm going to let you talk about email.
Because everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not... It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Hillary's a great friend of mine. Her husband is a great friend of mine. They're fantastic people. I mean, but she's a very nice woman. house where she destroyed 33,000 emails criminally.
I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state. In 2001, weeks after the attacks on New York City and on Washington, and frankly, the attacks on all of us, attacks that they were perpetrated by the Islamic fundamentalists, Mayor Rudy Giuliani visited Israel to show solidarity with terror victims. I sent my plane because I backed the mission for Israel 100%. Iran is the biggest sponsor of terrorism around the world, and we will work to dismantle that reach. Believe me, believe me. I've been with Israel so long in terms of I've received some of my greatest honors from Israel. My father before me, incredible. My daughter Ivanka is about to have a beautiful Jewish baby. When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one.
So what do you think of my Trump Home mattress collection by Serta? Finally, the same luxury and comfort I demand in my hotel.
What do you have in mind?
Something you were born to do.
Welcome to Room 9.
Looking good, number 9, looking good.
Where's your dignity?